Hi, this is Cal Sofkowski, and in this video we are going to review for the AP exam in May, and this is not meant to be exhaustive, but rather highlight some of the very major themes and content and skill in each of the 5 units. And as a quick reminder, your exam format is 55 multiple choice questions. You have 1 hour and 20 minutes to do that, followed by 4 FRQs, 1 hour and 40 minutes overall for that. I think you have plenty of time, particularly when it comes to the FRQs. And really with the FRQs, it's very important to elaborate and really write your heart out because, again, you have more than enough time for that. So just keep that in mind on the exam. Put down everything that you know about the topic. So let's get right into it. Unit 1 is focusing on the major theories of democracy. So this is where you're going to be looking at pluralism, hyper-pluralism, and the elite models. Now, Unit 1 also focuses on the early foundation of our country, and that, of course, starts with the Articles of Confederation. And if you recall, that gives too much power to the states as opposed to the federal government. And what really is problematic is you have no figurehead, you have no court system, states are coining their own money. It's very problematic. And what exposes this the most is, of course, Shays' Rebellion, which you have a rebellion going on, and as a result, the federal government is not able to help. The states can't put it down, and this exposes many of the weaknesses of the articles. So in comes the U.S. Constitution during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and there are many, many compromises that you should be aware of. For example, the 3/5 compromise with respect to slavery, and perhaps the most important one, in my opinion, the Connecticut or Great Compromise, which is going to merge the best aspects of the New Jersey and Virginia plans into the system that we have today, a House of Representatives and a Senate. And of course, you have that based on population and every state getting 2 respectively. Now, keep in mind that what's ultimately going to propel the Constitution to get ratified is thanks to the Bill of Rights, and that's going to give these assured protections, Amendments 1 through 10, essentially the confidence that the Constitution is not going to erode the rights of the states or the people. Now, there are various types of federalism that comes out at this point, and remember, this is connected to the 10th Amendment, so be very aware of dual federalism and how that's going to change to cooperative federalism following FDR and the New Deal and what we have today, basically through grants, block grants, for example, in with what we call fiscal federalism today. So the ongoing theme is really what is the appropriate balance of power between the national and state government. In many respects, that's still being decided today. So in terms of the House versus the Senate, be aware of their respective powers, their makeup. So for example, the House is much larger based on population. Senate, every state gets 2. And be aware of some of their exclusive powers respectively. For example, the House is in charge of impeachment, and the Senate would hold the trial. Senate also confirms the presidential appointments. Also keep in mind that you have mutual power such as taxation and legislative oversight. In the executive branch, of course, their role is to execute. You have that one person. They're the action figures of government that bureaucracy falls underneath, but many powers found in Article 2 of the Constitution, and one of them being commander-in-chief. But you also have informal powers. During times of crises, people tend to look at the president as a source of sort of the moral leader of the country as well. And keep in mind that we've had significant growth in the executive branch since the times of FDR, thanks to things like executive orders, executive privilege, and of course, the war powers. The most important power of the judicial branch is the power of judicial review, and that comes out of Marbury v. Madison, which allows it to declare laws and acts of the federal government unconstitutional. Very, very important that you are aware of judicial review. That's its biggest check on the House, Senate, as well as the executive branch. And then we have the bureaucracy, which include the action figures of government. So you're going to essentially have the Congress pass a law, and when they pass a law, they need somebody to implement it. So that's where the bureaucracy comes into play. So I'd be aware of bureaucratic agencies from the EPA, the FAA, the FCC, the SEC, and some of their major roles in what they do here. Now, one of the ways that we look at the executive, judicial, and legislative branches is the separation of powers as well as their checks on each other. In many ways, this is a glorified checks and balances type of test. So be aware of at least a few on each and each side. This is very important to know. All right. So then in Unit 3, we looked at the differences between civil rights and civil liberties. Remember, civil liberties are tied to the first 10 amendments, and civil rights ultimately are going to come about thanks to the 14th Amendment, in particular the Equal Protection Clause. That is very, very important. We also have due process that's going to come out of the 14th Amendment as well, and a very important term known as selective incorporation. Remember that the Bill of Rights only applied originally to the national government. So aspect by aspect, for example, Amendment 6 has many different aspects to it, such as having the right to an attorney and an impartial jury of your peers, right? Those are different aspects. So each aspect has to be incorporated one by one to be related to the states, for the states to have to abide by part or all of those amendments. I would highly suggest that you know all 27 amendments. I think that will make that test very easy. But if you are unsure of them, there is a video on my channel should you want to look a little bit further. Perhaps the hallmark document, of course, is the letter from a Birmingham jail by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that exemplifies civil rights and really the disconnect in terms of equality between white and African American citizens during the 1950s and prior to that point. And he's going to be saying that it's really inherently unequal. There's no way that you're able to do that. He even relates to his daughter and talking about how there's just an inherent lack of equality between these two groups. There's also a video on my channel should you want to go further into that. Let's get into Unit 4. This is all about political socialization, and this really happens just naturally if you think about the role of the family in shaping your own political orientation. Typically, your parents aren't going to sit you down and say, hey, Johnny, this is why we're a Republican or a Democrat. This happens informally. Very important. You know that television, conversations you hear from your parents, events that they might perhaps visit or engage in. And our ideologies, the big ones to know, liberal versus conservative versus libertarian. And really where liberals and conservatives differ is with the role of the government. Liberals typically want more government intervention when it comes to the economy, but want less government intervention when it comes to social issues such as same-sex marriage. Conservatives tend to be the opposite. You also see an element of religion coming into play here. They tend to be more okay with prayer in school. And again, that depends on where you are as a conservative and where you are in the country as well. They tend to be less for government involvement with social programs, and libertarians typically want as much government hands off the economy and social areas as much as possible to the extent that is practical. All right. And then also what's important is public opinion. We have polls. Keep in mind the importance of random sampling, margin of error. And this is basically a status for politicians to see where do people stand on an issue. Do they even like me to an extent? And this helps them frame campaign issues as well. So in many respects, polls are very important when it comes to democracy because it exemplifies what the people want and what they don't want. And you're likely to see some type of data analysis question from this unit, whether it's in a multiple choice form, but especially on the second type of FRQ. And then in the final unit here, we have talking about voter turnout and parties and essentially linkage institutions. So think about it with voter turnout. You know, there's a lot of issues, especially why do we hold it on just one Tuesday every year? Think about weather. Think about political efficacy. Do you believe that your vote matters? Some people have this idea that their vote doesn't matter out of millions of people who vote. In terms of voting behavior, there are various paradigms as to what explains that. Make sure that you're familiar with some of these. For example, the rational choice voter, that's based on what a citizen does for his or her best interests. You also have retrospective voting, for example, in which people reflect on the politician's past actions. What have they done for me in the past? Or you also have prospective voting, where you look to the future. What will this candidate do for me? And then you also have, of course, party line voting, where, hey, this person's a Republican, I'm a Republican, thus we're going to go that way. With third parties, again, they typically don't get much traction, especially at the national level. Your best bet to see them is that really at the state level, there are many barriers from cost to even getting on the ballot. Also, you have wasted ballot syndrome as well. In terms of interest groups, important to know that these are policy specialists, not policy generalists. Policy generalists would be political parties. and they are going to be using lobbyists. They are going to be doing everything in their power to advance a specific policy that they think is worthy. And then when we get to elections, congressional elections tend to be much smaller. They tend to be much shorter compared to presidential elections, which can be upwards of 2 years when you add in the primaries as well. Also think about the enormous cost that's involved with presidential elections, and especially the electoral college. This is where the popular vote does not determine who wins, unlike any other election in the United States. With presidential elections, as you'll recall, every state is worth a certain number of electors, and it is possible to get fewer votes yet win the election, as we saw in 2000 and 2016 as well. Campaign finance is a very big issue. This thanks to Citizens United and the role of super PACs, which is basically unlimited spending for corporations as well. Our first act of regulation really comes from the Federal Election Campaign Act in the 1970s, and that's going to set individual limits. Over time, we've seen that become a little bit eroded. We also do see the role of the FEC in terms of overseeing elections, but it's very important to be aware of the role of money in powering elections and war chest for presidential candidates. Also, it's important to note the media's role. In many ways, they are sometimes referred to as the fourth branch of the government in terms of their watchdog function. They inform the masses in many respects, and they are very pivotal for democracy simply because they are informing people of what's going on in our government in day-to-day operations that happen there. All right. And this is just a reminder of the foundational documents. I'm not going to go through all of them. There is a video on my channel should you wish to look at them, but I would be very, very familiar with these foundational documents as you will need to employ them in FRQ4. And then here are our list of cases for the Supreme Court. And you see everything from Marbury v. Madison down to Citizens United. Very important that you understand these cases and are able to apply them as needed, especially for the SCOTUS FRQ, which is number 3. All right, best of luck on your exam.